Good morning and welcome back to the History and Philosophy of Science in 6 Easy Steps 2015 edition. This is Saturday morning and this is your Week 2 intro and Week 1 recap, or we'll reverse the order on that. So I want to start though by just saying, remember that I'm here to help you, and you can email me anytime, you can tweet at me, which is a great way to get in touch with me. Ask me questions about your readings, about the assignments, about how to do things on Google Classroom, whatever it is, I am here for you. So let's keep the lines of communication open and feel free to contact me anytime. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to say. And secondly, speaking of communication, the Twitter chat is part of your assignments. We're going to have one each week. And why are we going to do that? Well, I want to have an interactive component here because I believe we all have a lot to learn from each other. So that's one reason. Now, why should we use Twitter? The reason I like Twitter is because Twitter is an amazing tool that enables us to instantly publish something to the whole world. Now, that's not going to happen with this first chat because we're just using the hashtag THAPBUS6, so that's only going to go to whoever might search for that, and I don't know why anyone would search for that. In the future, what we're going to start doing is adding other hashtags like hashtag science, hashtag philosophy, that sort of thing. And in those cases, anybody who's searching for those hashtags, those keywords, will see your tweets, and that's anybody in the whole world. So that's the cool thing about Twitter. It's instant global publishing. So I'd encourage you to get on there and make sure you watch the Twitter tutorial video that's on the About page and also under Assignment 3, because that's it's called Assignment 3. That's our first Twitter chat. And those are 8 points each. For the post, 4 points, and you reply to someone else, another 4 points. So let's try that out, and it's going to be lots of fun. So let's talk about the first week. Assignment 1, you made a graph, and what you saw is that if you plot the cumulative discoveries versus time, and by the way, it looks like everyone was able to figure out how to do that in Google Sheets. A couple revisions needed here and there. Make sure you make those revisions, turn them in for a higher score on that. You can always do that in this course. But what we saw, right, was this J-shaped curve. Now, I called it exponential. Depending on where you look, technically it's not an exponential function, exp, but it is geometric in that it builds on itself. It's it's definitely not a linear function. It's this J-shaped curve. And so basically what we see is that somewhere in the 16 or 1700s, this thing just takes off. So like basically you've got this long period of history where essentially was nothing was happening. And then we see this explosion, which is continuing today. Depending on the sources you used, how many sources, how much data you got, one of you pulled out as many as like a total of, I think, 2,500 discoveries. And you looked into, Paul, you looked at some discoveries that happened in the 2000s, and you pulled up some websites specifically on that and were able to get more data on that. And that was really cool because it showed that this exponential growth, it's become almost vertical, which is really amazing. We're going to get into that more in the last week. So I hope that was interesting for you, and I start off with that because we're going to kind of return to that curve in the final week. And it's also a good way for us to get a view of the history of science. By the way, I didn't require you to distinguish between science and technology on this assignment because I think that we'll save that for, I believe it's week 4, when we're going to look at the differences between science and technology. So for now, we're not worried about that. Now, I put some feedback on there, and if you go, you can look at comments on your spreadsheets. You can, and please do look at the comments that I put on the rubric and the score that I gave you. And remember, those are always subject to revision. You can go back in there and change those. And I also put some little notes on Google Classroom under the assignment for you, so you can look in all those places for feedback. Speaking of rubrics, always read the rubric. I grade according to the rubric. I don't grade anything that's not in the rubric. So make sure you look at those beforehand and have that right with you as you're doing the assignment, so you can use that as your sort of checklist for whether you've accomplished the goals or not. And make sure when you do your self-assessments, especially if you give yourself less than a 5 for anything, make sure that you explain why you gave yourself that score, why you didn't give yourself a 5, what you thought the shortcomings were, what could be improved, what you didn't understand, that sort of thing. And be sure to submit it through Classroom. I know it's easy to just share with me with my Gmail address on Google Drive, but it makes it more streamlined for me if you submit it within Google Classroom. So click Open on the assignment and then click Create, and then create your document there, and then when you're done, just click Submit. Okay. Now the spreadsheets are a little different. It won't let you submit those, but as long as you open it up and then edit it, it'll be automatically shared with me. So that's how that's going to work. Assignment 2. This I hope was pretty interesting to you. What I was looking for here is some clear arguments about how these discoveries that you picked impacted the world. Why would you say they're the most important? And got some interesting things on there. I was interested in a couple of you talked about evolution, which is very interesting choice. But there, it's a little bit challenging to say, okay, so how has this discovery impacted society? And some of you, I put that comment on there. If you want to get a higher score, go back in there and explain how did the theory of evolution impact society? How did it benefit humans? And this could be psychological, it could be philosophical, or it could be technological. It could be how it affected the rest of science and how it's become a paradigm that guides all research in the biological sciences, maybe something like that. So that's one of the things that you'll see a lot of comments on, is giving me more evidence for impact on society in general. Some of you pointed out one of the keys for, I think, when you're looking at the greatest discoveries, one of the keys is discoveries that ended up being the foundation or the seed of a whole tree of new discoveries, right? So that's where you get that exponential growth, that kind of geometric progression. One thing happens, and then that enables, say, 5 new things, which each enable 5 new things, which each enable 5 new things, and so on. Or that's where you get that geometric progression. So some of you mentioned that. Another area for improvement on a couple of your essays is I need to see the references that you used, and they should be cited in text. Google Docs has a nice little footnote feature just at the end of the sentence where you use the source or the paragraph. Just go on Insert, Footnote, and you could put your citation right in there. It'll number it for you really nicely. So that's a real easy way to do it, or you can use MLA format, whatever, for your in-text citations. Okay? Let's see. Now, as far as grades, you'll be able to see those. At this point, you can see those in Google Classroom under the individual assignments. I'm going to be working on a kind of grade book system through Google that you'll be able to view your cumulative grades in as time goes on. I haven't got that ready yet. Okay, so that does it for week 1, and I think, like I said, in summary, I wasn't looking for specific events for all of you to pick Newton, or for all of you to pick discovery of antibiotics, or one of you picked vaccination, which was really cool. I was just looking for you to back it up with evidence and consider other perspectives. So what that means is, talk about how some people might say this isn't that important because blah, 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 but I think it's important because this. Right, that sort of thing. So, yeah, that about does it for week 1. So, looking into week 2, we are going to start by viewing a play that was done by a team at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and it's a play about the discovery of oxygen. It's called Oxygen. It's in 2 acts, and it's posted under assignment 4. So watch that carefully, and you might want to take notes about specific incidents or evidences or lines of argument that you could use for who discovered oxygen. They talk about 3 different scientists, and it's a dramatic depiction of who discovered oxygen, and they use kind of this approach where they keep flashing back and forth between, or switching back and forth between a panel that's trying to assign a Nobel Prize for the discovery of oxygen, and then these other actors acting out incidents around that time period. So I think you'll find it interesting, or I hope you will, and then you're going to write up a response to that, write up another essay that is going to answer the question, who discovered oxygen? Now, if you've already started reading Kuhn, you will know that this whole word discovery is kind of a loaded term. And that's one of the things I think that will come out in the play as well. And so feel free to use Kuhn as a reference in there, but make sure you cite evidence from the movie and from the play. So that is who discovered oxygen. I thought I'd give you a little primer on the Phlogiston Theory, which is discussed in the play. Before Antoine Lavoisier discovered his, or came up with his theory, the oxygen theory of combustion, the most prevalent theory, and actually it was a theory that guided most of chemical research, was called the Phlogiston Theory. And in this view, the way that combustion worked was when something burned, it released something called phlogiston, which was like an element. It was like a greasy element. And you can picture kind of soot or smoke coming out of something as it burned. So when something burns, it releases phlogiston. Now, it was also the stuff that gave metals their shiny property. So when you burn a metal, it turns out, it loses its shininess. It becomes kind of just a dull powder, a dull earthy powder. And what they said was that when you burned a metal, you released its phlogiston, and this made it become just something called an earth, or a calx. Now, when Lavoisier came along, he questioned that whole thing, because it had been noticed before that when you burn metals, they gain mass. So even though, say, when you burn a stick, it loses mass, which makes sense in the phlogiston theory, something gaining mass when you burn it doesn't really make sense. So that was one of the things that got Antoine Lavoisier thinking about that. And it's a great example of a paradigm shift, as we'll see in Assignment 5. Assignment 5 is the big one so far. It's kind of the centerpiece of the course, or one of the centerpieces of the course. You hopefully have been reading in this book, Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions. I want you to read the whole thing. You don't have to read the postscript, but I want you to especially focus in on those chapters that are marked with an asterisk on the outline that I've provided for you. Don't forget to take a look at the outline and watch the video that says Getting Started with Kuhn's Revolutions. I think you'll find that helpful. And don't, if you'd rather listen than read, take a look on the About page and you'll see a link to the audio files, the MP3 files of Kuhn's book. So it's a professional reading the book. So if you'd rather listen to that, or if you're going somewhere this summer and you want to listen, that would be a good idea. I wanted to briefly summarize where Kuhn's coming from. I did this on the video too, I believe, but when I am teaching biology, one of the things I notice that's really kind of cool at the beginning of the year is when I first give students a slide with cells on it, like maybe it's their cheek cells, and maybe you've done this already in bio. Put it under the microscope, and if most students have never looked at cells before at this point, and I say, okay, draw the cell. What I'll get is many of the students will just basically draw scribbles. They'll draw little circles and dots and scribbles, but nothing that looks like a cell. And when I look under the microscope, I clearly, distinctly see these little blobs with a little darker circle in the middle. That's the nucleus. I see cells. Now, what I like to do is do that initially with students, and then we go into more detail on the parts of the cell. And once you've gone into detail on the parts of the cell, and they've looked at pictures, students have looked at pictures in the textbook and so on, give them that same slide again and say, now draw the cell. And now they'll draw the cell. Now they'll draw the cell with the nucleus and so on. And I think that's kind of a little tiny example of what Kuhn's talking about when he says a paradigm shift, a change in worldview. What before was seen as scribbles and dots and little circles is now seen as a cell. So it's a shift in worldview. It's like you're looking through different glasses at the world. And this happens in science, and sometimes it happens in big ways. Like before, they were looking at combustion as the release of phlogiston, and now they're looking at it as combination with oxygen from air. And that, it even goes beyond that, because the combination theory of combustion affected how we looked at all of chemistry. It really totally changed it. Kuhn mentions that when Lavoisier wrote his textbook on chemistry, it was completely different. It was completely different than previous textbooks on chemistry. So it was like he was speaking a different language almost. That's how big the shift was. And these changes in perspective, the different perspectives are what Kuhn calls incommensurable. They're not compatible at all. It's like they're in different languages. And they don't actually really build on each other in Kuhn's view. It's just a total change in perspective each time. And this kind of calls into question the progress of science, which is the last chapter in the book, and what we'll be getting to in a little bit more depth next week when we talk about Karl Popper and compare him to Thomas Kuhn. Does science really progress if this is the case? If people are just kind of, you've got these like random perspective changes happening once in a while? This is a good question. It's something I want you to think about as you're reading Thomas Kuhn, because that's one thing that some of his critics said, that he was kind of a relativist, and that it was just these changes in perspective rather than a real progress toward something like truth, right? So that's what we're getting into in assignment number 5. And again, there's lots of help for you there, and if you're really struggling with it, shoot me a tweet and say, or an email, can you help me out with this chapter? I don't understand what he's saying here. I'm going to be looking for lots of references to the book in this paper under that category of evidence. We're specifically talking about Kuhn in this case, so we want you to be looking there. So in conclusion, for your week 2 intro video here, don't forget Twitter. There's already 2 questions up there. The first one is, why did you take this course? The second one is, what's the most important scientific discovery of all time? And you'll see those labeled Q1, Q2 when you search hashtag THAPOS6, all one word. All right? This is how we're going to interact. It's how we're going to learn from each other. It's how we're going to synergize, right? And keep in touch with me as well. And as you're doing these assignments this week and this whole course, really, I want you to think about how you view the world. And I hope that this kind of raises those questions in your mind. It makes you think, how are the things that I think about the world shaped by a paradigm that I'm in, that I'm maybe not aware of? So think about that. All right, and I hope you're having fun with the course so far. I certainly enjoyed reading your assignments and looking at your graphs, some real quality stuff there. I was impressed by the writing. I was impressed by your ability to use Google Sheets. Don't be discouraged by a low score right now, because it is not final in any sense. Please do resubmit. I will gladly rescore them and give you some more feedback. Okay, so don't get discouraged by that. Just persevere, and let's carry on. Okay, and I hope you're enjoying your summer and looking forward to the following week.